Staying in Germany, and Chancellor Angela Merkel welcomed Ukraine's recently elected President Volodymyr Zelenskiy in Berlin. But while a military band played their national anthems in very hot weather, the German leader seemed unwell, shaking at times. But when she walked by the Guard of Honor, the trembling seemed to have stopped. Merkel said later at a press conference that she had some water to drink and was feeling much better. Zelensky is in the German capital for discussions on bilateral issues on the Minsk peace process to resolve Ukraine's tensions with Russia. Let's talk to our correspondents. In Berlin, we have our political correspondent, Emma Chaz. And in Kiev, we have DW's Nick Connolly. Emma, let me start with you. First of all, we saw these pictures of Chancellor Angela Merkel not looking very well. Do we know how she is now?
Well, she certainly seemed afterwards to feel much better, but the scene earlier on today, while the two national anthems were playing, was actually quite impressive. We saw Chancellor Angela Merkel shaking, and she was visibly trying to contain the situation as she stood under the sun. It's quite warm here in Berlin, which could explain why she felt unwell. Now, according to DPA news agency, it isn't the first time that the German leader suffered from such a health incident, and worried journalists asked her in the press conference after her meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskiy how she was feeling, and here's what she had to say to reassure people.
I've drunk at least 3 glasses of water, which I apparently needed. So now I'm doing very well.
So Chancellor Merkel feeling much better there. Dehydration obviously seems to be the problem. Nick, in Kiev, what is the significance of Ukraine's new president's visit to Berlin? Why is he here?
Well, Amrita, I think first and foremost, this was a chance for both of them to take a look at each other and to really get to know each other. At this level in politics, people have mostly come across each other at some event or other. But in the case of Zelensky, the real outsider, someone who only really entered politics a couple of months ago, there hadn't been a meeting previously. There was a lot of head scratching in Berlin when he won that landslide victory in April's election. Who is this guy? Is he someone who can do real politics beyond electioneering and beyond his obvious talent for speaking to voters? So that was really first and foremost. But there are also real matters of points of difference between Berlin and Kiev. Despite the relationship being very good and there being lots of agreement on lots of other issues, there is the issue of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that Russia is building to Russia, something that Ukraine says will undermine its energy security. That's something that continues to be built despite Ukrainian concerns. And Zelensky very much reiterating the criticism that had come from his predecessor also about that pipeline. Then there's the issue of sanctions. Chancellor Merkel sticking firm to them, but increasingly loud voices in Germany now saying that it's time to end those sanctions against Russia since they haven't been able to force Russia to change its behaviour. And I think it's important to remember here that these are two leaders who really couldn't be much more different in terms of temperament and style. And this was really an opportunity for them to show that despite those differences, they can work together and try to push for some progress on peace talks in Donbass.
And Emma, what is Germany hoping from this visit with Volodymyr Zelenskiy?
Well, just as Nick Connolly said in Kiev, that's true that both leaders were getting to know one another. But at the press conference after the meeting, they talked for about an hour, and Angela Merkel made clear that the Western sanctions would only be lifted against Russia if Ukraine's sovereignty was restored. She said, I quote, "As long as there is no progress on this front, the sanctions cannot be lifted. And the sanctions related to Crimea can only be lifted if Crimea returns to Ukraine," end quote. So she made a very firm statement in favor of Ukraine's sovereignty, and I think that's what we can take away from today's meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskiy.
Right, and Nick, in Kiev, Germany is very keen to see progress on the Minsk peace process. What can Zelensky offer on that?
Well, Amrita, it's pretty tough to see where he goes from here. He has said that bringing peace to the east of Ukraine is his priority. Stopping Ukrainian soldiers dying, he said in his big inaugural speech, would be his main aim as leader. But, to be totally honest about this, he can bring new faces to the table, he can bring in new negotiators, he can try and change the tone that really has seen these negotiations run into a cul-de-sac in the last few years with barely any progress made. He's talked about confidence-building moves like small exchanges of prisoners from both sides to really improve the tone between the two sides. But beyond that, this is not something strictly that's really in his hands to give. A lot of this will be decided in the Kremlin and the Kremlin's support for those pro-Russian separatists that are facing off against the Ukrainian government. And beyond that, even if Zelensky wanted to make big concessions to the other side, it's not clear that Ukrainian society will let him do that. Hundreds of thousands of people have fought in that conflict, thousands have died, and there are a lot of people who are very vocal here who will be watching and won't be allowing him to do anything which they think endangers Ukraine's interests.
Right, Nick Connolly in Kiev and DW's political correspondent Emmanuel Shaz, thank you both very much for your perspectives.